Call the meeting of the Committee of Fiscal Affairs to order. The first item of business will be the approval of the minutes for the meeting of June 7th.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions, comments, changes? Being none, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We're going to go out of order, and I'd like to turn it over to the Chancellor, who's going to start on the presentation of the budget, and do that first, since it's the most important thing on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for asking for this meeting at this time, because I know many people were planning to stay out on vacation or go to vacation, but I thought that this was important. And let me sort of set the context for this discussion. I will start it. I'll then call on Mark Shaw to give some of the political context and some of what we see happening in Albany over the next few months. And then we'll get just to a brief presentation by Matthew Sapienza dealing with the budget as we know it today, and then obviously take some questions. So I appreciate the indulgence of all of you for being here. The background is that I anticipate at our meeting in September and in November that we're going to have to make some decisions on the revenue side of our budget, which has really been held in abeyance. And instead of hitting the board and the presidents and obviously the faculty and other constituencies here in the university with what we think is the prudent approach, I wanted to create a glide path. So we will start the discussion tonight. We'll get into it in more detail as we drill down more deeply into the issues in September. And in November, I anticipate that we will come in with a tuition proposal that clearly will still have to be shaped because of the much of the political discussion in Albany, but I think it's critically important that we do it and do it this way. So this is the opening salvo, if you will, for a serious discussion about what we face today in terms of our resources to manage the university and create the necessary investment vehicles for us to continue to feed the university so that we can do the things that a university of this stature needs to do in order to provide the kinds of opportunities for our students on a going forward basis. In the past 2 years alone, and I don't want to usurp any of Matthew Sapienza's presentation, we have had extracted out of our operating budget about $205 million. And if we go back further from 2 years, the numbers continue to rise. The facts are that we have not had really serious investment for a suspended period of time in this university. And the only reason that we were able to generate some of the investment that has had material impact on the university is that we created an investment vehicle several years ago called the CUNY Compact. And I just want to review that very, very briefly for you because so many of you are familiar with it, but it deserves a brushing off and for all of us to take a fresh look at the compact idea. The idea was to create a shared responsibility for investment purposes at the university. This was not about sustaining the operating budget, what we often refer to as our mandatory costs, and that really enable us to continue our operation. The compact idea was really to say, we have our base operating needs. Obviously, they go up and down depending upon the fiscal vagaries of New York State and New York City, but we need to have an investment process so that we can create more faculty positions, that we can buy the sophisticated instrumentation and equipment that we need for the university, that we provide for academic supports for our students, that we do the things over and beyond what the base operating budgets were giving us. And we understood, and I understood, and I think I explained this adequately to most people. We did not believe that in the climate that we are operating in for the past few years that we were going to see big infusions of dollars from the state. So we wanted to create some incentive that would free up some opportunity for the university to create dollars, to create investments. We also were deeply concerned about the way in which tuition was levied at this university for a sustained period of time. And it went simply as all of us have experienced, that when things were stable, if not good in the in the state of New York, in the city of New York, we probably had no tuition increase. So one could conceivably envision a situation where, depending upon when you were born, you can enter the university and not see any tuition increase for 4 or 5 years. And then, because of business cycles and change in the financial condition of New York State, if we saw a dip in revenue coming to support the various needs of the agencies in the state of New York, we would see spikes in tuition. Sometimes large spikes in tuition. I don't want it, all of you will remember, we've seen 20-25% increases in tuition. And we would see it for 2 years in a row, 3 years in a row. It was the most regressive way of thinking about creating tuition to support the needs of the university. What mattered, what was even worse, is that none of the students who saw that increase in tuition saw that money used for any purposes. The money was just swept off the table into the general treasury of the state of New York, and students were basically taking all of the risk. They were taking the risk by being charged tuition and not seeing any benefit at all. So because of the tuition revenue piece, and because of the need, given, starting with Chairman Schmidt's report in 1998 about the need to reimagine the university and to rethink new things for the university, when I came in, I knew we needed to have an investment vehicle to create the kind of money that we need to do all of the things that we've done. And all of you know that we've done an enormous amount over the past few years. So the compact idea was the recognition that tuition needed to be rationalized rather than haphazard as it was, and that if we dreamt about things for our students to improve the reputation of the university and to start things that were needed for them to have a competitive experience here at the university, we had to find ways to generate income, absent income from the state of New York. The compact, therefore, envisaged a rational tuition policy where small incremental increases in tuition would be levied. We made the pledge that if any student was in harm's way as a result of a tuition increase and they could demonstrate after all of the financial aid was provided, that they could no longer maintain their matriculation, we would forfeit some of this revenue and keep that student whole. And we continue to make that pledge today. So a rational tuition policy was important. We also said that we have an obligation on behalf of the university to generate revenue. And that's when we started the first ever campaign for the university. Never before, I take you back to 1998, 97, where the amount of money that was raised at this university was about $30 or $40 million a year, a paltry sum of money for a university of this size. We invested in creating a development operation, and the chairman and I stood up, I forget now when it was, Benno, in 1994, I think, when we announced the first campaign for CUNY. We put a target out there of $1.2 billion, and we achieved the $1.2 billion goal a couple of years. 2004. It was 2000, or whenever it was, people looked at us that we were out of our minds, that CUNY could never do this, and we demonstrated we could do it. But we didn't do it for public relations purposes. We were doing it to understand that we had to emulate other universities that depend on philanthropy to support investment. So philanthropy became very much a part of the compact, with a rational tuition policy, with a plan to develop productivity actions, efficiency actions that could save money, reprogram that money for investment. We created a whole office of enrollment management so that we can generate enrollment increases in smart ways that would generate revenue. And most importantly, we said to the state of New York, we want investment, but at least maintain our mandatory costs. If you start fiddling with our mandatory costs, this whole structure would collapse. And we asked that as we increase tuition, that whatever the index that we were using, whether it was a basket of economic indicators or the HEPI or the Consumer Price Index, that the TAP schedule be adjusted according to those increases in tuition. That was the compact. We implemented it, and everything that we have seen over the past several years as a result of new investment was generated by this new investment vehicle for the university, and it worked wonderfully for us. Now, last year, let's just take a look at last year. A new governor is put in office, Governor Patterson, a new chancellor at SUNY, Nancy Zimpher, is appointed, and she and I had several conversations, obviously conversations with Governor Patterson, and as a result of that, those conversations, along with the division of the budget and the governor, a new plan for public higher education was announced, the Public Higher Education Empowerment Act. Some of it I was very supportive of, some of it I was critical of. And let me just review for you. It basically had the compact idea, but it was very aggressive. It basically said that the legislature is going to step aside in terms of being heard with respect to tuition increases, that we would cede that responsibility to the trustees at both CUNY and SUNY, that over a period of time, maybe say 5 years, both CUNY and SUNY, the two boards of trustees, could elect, if they so desired, increasing tuition by 2.5 times the HEPI. At that time, the HEPI was running about 4%, so 2.5 times was 10%. That, to me, sounded much too aggressive and would not work for CUNY, and it might work for SUNY, but the SUNY chancellor was really pushing that, and we were starting to express a little concern about it. There were some wonderful things in the act that lifted some of the regulatory burdens that we continue to face at the university, largely for us around procurement, which continues to be a problem for us. But most importantly, the thing that was missing from the act, which I strenuously objected to, was that it transferred the risk from the state of New York right onto the shoulders of the students. And it transferred the risk because the mandatory cost the principle that was so embedded in the CUNY compact was now missing. So the state of New York could conceivably face a situation where we charge the students 10% in a given year, and money would be extracted out of the operating budget of the university, and the students would have supported this with a tuition increase but saw no benefit because the university still could not move. And I thought that was a serious flaw in the Public Higher Education Empowerment Act. Now, we did not, we had our voices heard, but sotto voce, without making, big public pronouncement of where we saw some of the deficiencies, but we certainly made this position known to the division of the budget and to the governor, the governor's people, and to the members of the legislature. We said that along with SUNY, we have to have a rational tuition policy. We just cannot continue to play helter-skelter with tuition. It has to be predictable, and we have to protect the students. The other part of the empowerment program was that there was nothing on tap. Here we could increase tuition significantly, and TAP was not increasing at a similar rate. So we, expressed our views, and at the end of the day, and now we're really I'm taking you up to where we are today, the empowerment program was not advanced by the state legislature, and there's a whole lot of reasons for that. So that's where we are today. I'm going to ask Mark Shaw to take us where we are today, what he sees happening over the next few months. I'll ask Matthew Sapienza just to take you through some slides, just to refresh your memory on what the state legislature adopted for CUNY, where the city is with respect to CUNY. But I will tell you all, as a precursor, I don't like to surprise anybody, at the end of the day, we must increase revenue. We cannot stay where we are because the students are the ones that are going to suffer here. We're not going to have the faculty. We're not going to have all of the essential ingredients that are needed for an education that all of us need to be proud of and where our students need to have to be competitive as they go out and to compete for jobs and compete for positions in professional schools or PhD programs or whatever it is that they decide to do. We have, the moral imperative for me is that we have to give the students, the contract that we must provide with these students is that we are going to do the best that we can to give them the experience that they need to succeed in life. If we do less than that, I think we're being negligent in what it is. So we want to re-seize the initiative. And by re-seizing the initiative, that means we're going to have to go out in front. And we haven't been out in front this last year because we wanted to see what would happen with moderating this Empowerment Act, but it didn't go anyplace. And I'd like to ask Mark to take us up to where I just took you and then open this up for any questions. But in September and November, when the board meets, action is going to have to be taken in some way to sustain us and create the investments that we're going to need. So, Mark?
Okay. Well, as usual, the chancellor covered most of the important items that we wanted to bring to the committee meeting for discussion. And, you know, Matt's going to have a presentation on exactly what's happening and what happened in Albany and in New York City over the last couple of months and what we can look forward to. But let me just give a little bit of a context to it. You know, in the context is basically two different things. One is the overall fiscal situation of the economy. You know, there's no question that the federal and state economies continue to be troubling in terms of their outlook. I don't think anybody's talking about any robust growth happening anytime soon at the national level or the state or city level. While things have stabilized, everybody's very nervous about how long this stability is going to last, and, you know, many people are shaking their heads and wondering when the next shoe will drop. And, you know, there's a lot of fear about the next shoe actually involving state governments, which means it'll hit us front and center, since at the end of the day we continue to get most of our money from state budgets. But there is a, you know, potential coming credit crunch of state governments just sitting out there right under the surface. A lot of people are starting to talk about it, not unlike the mortgage bubble that happened. You know, it's one of the things the lieutenant governor has been working on right now and continues to work on. And it's a scary thing, because at the same time that a state funding crisis occurs, there's the clear inability of the federal government to come in and do something. You know, we were lucky to get the stimulus package extended as far as it was. But, you know, especially post the November elections, I don't think anybody that's watching Washington thinks that they're going to do anything but focus on deficit reduction. And when you focus on deficit reduction, you don't start talking about doing big stimulus packages to bail out state governments. So it's a very unsettled waters backwards in the fiscal situation. When you combine that with the fact that at a Albany political situation, I mean, we've gone through, this last year was another one of those years that everybody said, well, it can't be worse than it was the year before, right? And we've topped it every year for the last couple of years here in New York. So it's the outlook is incredibly uncertain in Albany. You know, the good news is we're going to have a new governor. You know, most people are pretty comfortable with what's going to happen with that. I think, was it the Daily News already did an editorial before the primaries are even done that the election's over. So, you know, there will be a new governor, but not at all to be critical of him, but he doesn't come with executive experience. And as we've seen in Washington, that makes a big difference and matters sometime. And it's a much bigger ship to steer than an attorney general's office. So he's going to be getting his feet wet and working with the State Division of Budget, which is an important player in Albany all the time, but especially in the beginning of a new administration, it's an incredibly important place. There's a joke in Albany that there's a reason why the governor's office is on the first floor and DOB is on the first floor. It's because they hold up the second floor. But especially when a new governor comes along, and it's not just the inexperience of a new governor necessarily, but he's bringing on new commissioners. The permanent government that understands how things work in Albany is the State Division of the Budget. So they're going to be very important, and we have unbelievable relations there, which is positive for us. On the other hand, what we need out of Albany is money, and state budget is loyalty is not going to be to CUNY, it's going to be to the new governor. Thank you very much. And so, you know, no matter how good our relations with them are, it's their interest first and foremost is going to be the governor in the state of New York. And we just have to make sure they understand the importance of CUNY in that larger picture. And, you know, that's where things like the compact come into play. So that's sort of the immediate political and fiscal backdrop. You know, in addition to that, as we all know, we have this situation in the New York State Senate where they changed political hands this, you know, last go-round for the first time in 30-plus years. And, you know, the Democrats currently control the Senate majority. They're still in a learning mode to some degree, you know, and there's a lot of uncertainty in this election as to what's going to happen there. So there are clearly going to be some potential changes there that we have to worry about. And the Assembly, while it's going to be the same as it currently is, you know, with probably minor changes, led by Shelley Silver, it also is going to tack to the fact that a new governor is in town and, you know, try to deal with what all of that means. And they're very important because as the Chancellor just walked through what was missing from the FIA Act in terms of what was really important to CUNY, the two things being coverage of mandated costs and TAP policy that grows with tuition. Those are the two biggest issues of the Assembly. So, you know, we're very much in line with them in terms of their issues, but we have to be careful that we don't be perceived as being on the side of the Assembly in any of these discussions or fights with the Senate and the governor's office that are going to occur in Albany. So, you know, that's sort of the overall picture of what's out there. What all of this means is that we're going to face, you know, I want to say fiscal uncertainties because the political uncertainties that we're going to face in Albany really will make the fiscal situation worse. So we're going to have a fiscal instability that's coming from two things. One, the general economy, and then two, what's going to be Albany's new emphasis in terms of funding of public higher education. And in the larger picture of funding public higher education, we all know that it's, you know, on this decreasing curve over time. The money that used to go to public higher education in this state and in a number of other states now goes, instead of, you know, it's the same students except they're in jail and they're paying for the correction system. And, you know, with the more recent problems, it's also money that's now funding debt service and pensions. But you can actually do a correlation and show the cost of corrections in states around the country is the money that used to go into higher education. And in point of fact, they get a lot more money than we got. It costs a lot more to incarcerate a person than to send them certainly to a public college. And it's easy to say, well, let's just switch those things, but unfortunately you can't do that. You have to, you know, go down parallel paths and figure out what to do. And that's, you know, in large part what Matt and his staff tries to figure out is, even knowing all these big picture problems that occur, we still have to balance next year's budget after all the hollering is done. And it has to be in the context of a longer-term plan. The longer-term plan needs to focus on the proposals that the Chancellor talked about in terms of the compact, and we need to find a way to get it back front and center on the table. And just to remind everybody here, while the compact idea started in this university in 2004, I think, 2005, it was discussed and became one of the recommendations of what was then Governor Spitz's Higher Education Commission, and unfortunately never made it into the FIA program. But if you look back at the recommendations of the State Higher Education Commission, it recommended taking the CUNY compact proposal and making it statewide. And in many ways, we need to get everybody back onto that picture, and it's for two reasons. One is, you know, given the outlook of where else we can get money, and, you know, the university is mightily working on finding new revenue sources, but tuition and increasing tuition, you know, on a rational basis needs to be part of that. And the best way to be able to do that and at the same time accept that we're doing our responsibility is ensuring that the state, whether it's through an enhanced TAP policy, finds a way to have TAP grow with tuition so that people who don't have the resources otherwise to pay for an education can continue to get them from the state. So we can get increased tuition revenue, and it doesn't hurt or harm any of the existing students or even the prospective students. And attaching the TAP policy to the funding of higher education tuition levels is a very important thing to be focused on and doing, and it's one of the things we're going to try to do. Now, the timing of all this is, and it's going to go through a couple different steps. There's a lot of talk of coming back into a special session, I think September 20th, which is the week after the primary, and still before the general. And they're coming back not for us, they're coming back for another thing in education. It's it's not the racing bill.
The allocation.
It's the allocation, not of the race to the top money, actually. It was the other, that money's already been allocated, but it was the last piece of federal money that came to the state still needs to be appropriated. So they're coming back for that, and there are quiet discussions going on with both the governor's office and the legislature of how we could restructure the FIA proposal to do something in the context of a couple weeks from now. Understanding that, every day that we get closer to the end, it gets a little harder for them to act, but those discussions are going to continue. There'll also be an attempt to do a special session potentially after the election. At that point, even though the governor-elect will not have taken office, he'll effectively control the agenda. And that gets to the issue of what are the governor's initiatives going to be in higher education, and obviously he's busy campaigning, and it's not CUNY is not first and foremost in his mind, although we're also having discussions with a number of the people that are working with the governor on the importance of higher education. So, and then there'll be the budget that'll come out in January. But as the chancellor said, the issue first and foremost for us in the short term is going to be to make sure we're able to get tuition to deal with some of the problem that Matt's about to go through. And in order for there to be a discussion of that, it has to happen in the fall if it's going to happen for the second term this year. So with that as sort of a backdrop, tell us the good news.
I'll try. Thanks, Mark, and hello, everyone. We're going to go through this presentation to familiarize ourselves with some of the numbers and to kind of catch up when we last met as to what happened up in Albany and at City Hall. So turn to page 2. In the state enacted budget that took place in early August, CUNY senior colleges were hit with a reduction of $84.4 million. Now, this reduction was included in the governor's executive budget, and it made its way all the way through the enacted budget. And there's two main components of that: a $63.6 million reduction in state aid, plus a $20.8 million reduction that's tied to workforce savings. As you'll recall, the governor in his executive budget had proposed $250 million in overall statewide workforce savings that he hoped to generate in discussions with the unions. And there had been some talk about furloughs and some talk about payroll lag, and none of those things really got any traction up in Albany. And so CUNY's budget has been reduced by this $20.8 million as part of the workforce savings. And as the Chancellor mentioned earlier, over the past 3 fiscal years, the total cut to our senior colleges is now $205 million. And so while in each year, fiscal 09, we had a $68 million cut, and fiscal 10, we had a $53 million cut, our senior colleges have been able to manage those cuts and protect the core mission of their colleges. But now, because of the cumulative effect of these cuts, our college presidents are going to have to make some tough decisions in terms of how to allocate these across their campuses. And so on page 3, as a result of these reductions, the following actions were taken. The university issued its allocations to the senior colleges about a month or so ago, and the senior college-based budgets were reduced by 2.5%, which achieved savings of $28.6 million. In addition, we increased college revenue targets by $7 million, which represented about 50% of the projected enrollment growth for this year. And lastly, the colleges were asked to set aside a reserve of 1.25% of their budget, which was a little over $14 million, because of the continued uncertainty in the state budget, and because of the uncertainty in whether we're able to generate revenues for the spring semester, as the Chancellor and Mark talked about earlier. So that's the senior college picture. The community college picture, again, not much better. Page 4, you can see that the community college is taking reductions as well. The governor had proposed a reduction to the community college base aid formula of $285 per FTE, which is about $20 million for CUNY's community college in diminished aid. The legislature, in their budget proposals, had recommended to fully restore those funds, but as you know, the governor went in and vetoed 6,900 legislative ads in the enacted budget, including the restoration of the community college base aid. And so the community colleges are down about $20 million in overall base aid. And you can see by that third bullet there, over the last 2 fiscal years, we've lost $415 per FTE in the community college base aid formula, which is about $29 million. From $26.75, we had a $130 per FTE reduction last year as part of the deficit reduction package, and now this $285 reduction, we're down to $22.60 per FTE. And one very important thing to keep in mind about the community college base aid, which is about $178 million, $32.8 million of that is coming from the federal stimulus package. And so if these funds lapse, which they are due to in 2012, this poses a big risk in the community college funding from the state. And so that's something that we have to be very, very mindful of in our planning for 2012. As a result of these reductions, on page 5, the community colleges, as we said earlier, took a reduction of about $20 million in state aid. This comes on top of reductions that the community colleges took in 2010. Fiscal year 2010, the community colleges took a $14 million mid-year reduction, which was from both state and city mid-year reductions. About $70 million of that came from college-based budgets. The other half, the university managed through central accounts. But again, we're seeing the cumulative effect of these cuts over a number of years. When the university issued its allocation to the community colleges, the community college allocation is done through a funding model, which is different from the senior colleges, which is a base budget funding model. And the allocation model called for only 90% to be funded of the total allocation model for this year. And just to give you a context, in fiscal year 2010, the university was able to provide 99% of the funding model. The allocation model for the community colleges is an aspirational model, which basically says here's how much each community college should receive given available funding from the state and city. And so this year, we're only able to do 90%, mostly due to the reduction in state aid. And again, talking about the cumulative effect of these cuts, not only is it reduced capacity in terms of spending, but our enrollment at the community colleges continues to grow. And you can see since 1999, we've increased by 43%. And again, to put that into context, that's adding NYU and Columbia to our community colleges since 1999. Page 6, we're also concerned about changes to financial aid in the current year. As part of the governor's vetoes, he also vetoed the legislative restorations to the TAP program. And the big reduction there is a $75 reduction to all TAP awards for the current year. And so that is going to have a tremendous impact on the students who do receive TAP. Graduate students also will not be eligible to receive TAP for this year. And there's also new satisfactory academic progress standards that have now been established that, again, the governor put in, legislature proposed to restore it, and they were vetoed. And so this is something that we're very concerned about that TAP-eligible students will now take 15 credits a semester to retain their eligibility rather than 12, which have been in the past. So that's something, again, we're very concerned about. In total, the state is projecting to generate about $34 million in savings from the TAP program. In terms of the amount of awards that our students would lose, we're still trying to calculate that, but it's at least $7 million in reduced awards to our students in financial aid for this year. So, again, something that we're very concerned about. On the city side, the Valone scholarships were reduced from $9.5 million in fiscal 10 to $6 million in fiscal 11. So, again, the Valone scholarship award amounts are going to have to be managed carefully this year. The one positive was that the federal Pell Grant did increase for this year from $53.50 to $55.50. But again, the impact of this increase is now being diminished by the reductions in TAP, especially. And so students who were counting on that increase to use towards books and other educational expenses are now going to have to use it to cover their TAP shortfall. Page 7, some other challenges that are part of our base budgets from both the state and the city. CUNY's child care centers received about a $750,000 reduction in the state budget through the Office of Children and Family Services budget. And so, again, this is going to impact our 19 child care centers throughout the university. The CUNY Leads program, which is a terrific program for our students with disabilities and provides academic and career services. The funding for this program was totally eliminated. It's collaboration with the State Education Department. And again, the funding has been totally eliminated in fiscal year 11. And our state and city budgets both contain virtually no new capital funding for new projects, for new construction projects. We did receive critical maintenance money, which is terrific and we're very grateful for, but again, no new building projects in either the state or the city budget.
You don't have to go over the 2 acts.
Sure. No, slides 8 and 9. Slides 8 is the Public Higher Ed Act, which Chancellor and Senior Vice Chancellor Shaw went over, so we won't talk about that. Slide 9 on tuition. Again, to repeat what was said earlier, the state budget did not include the revenue appropriation for the 2% tuition increase that was authorized by the Board of Trustees for this fall. And so therefore tuition is not being increased for this fall. But again, we don't have the use of that revenue as an offset to some of our reductions. And so the university is studying tuition, looking at differential tuition. And as the Chancellor said earlier, there will be more discussion about this at the September and November board meetings. Slide 12, the fiscal year 12 outlook, which we're going to have to talk about real soon. Again, in the November board meeting, we'll be presenting our 2012 budget request. And the state is looking at some hefty shortfalls for the next 3 years. The state had a shortfall of about $15 to $16 billion for 2012. With the actions taken in the state enacted budget for 2011, that was brought down to $8.2 billion, but that does increase to about $16 billion again in 2014. And again, a large portion of the risk in the state budget is the reliance on the federal stimulus package and the sunsetting of those funds in the out years. And again, as Senior Vice Chancellor Shaw said earlier, the new budget is going to be constructed as the state is transitioning to new leadership. And so that, again, presents risk for us. On the city side, the city is also facing shortfalls, starting with $3.7 billion in 2012. And again, the risk on the city is what is the state going to do to close its budget gap of $8 billion next year, and how is that going to impact the city? And is that going to blow a big hole in the city's budget? Fiscal year 11, slide 11, fiscal planning strategies, and the Chancellor touched on this earlier. We have convened a budget working group along with 2 other working groups, regulatory reform and asset management working group, and we started this work long ago because we saw the storm clouds coming for fiscal year 11 and fiscal year 12, and we hope to have these reports done shortly and issued to the university community, but we are identifying ways in that the university can be more efficient in all areas of our spending, and also looking at revenue opportunities as well. Slide 12 describes the compact, which again the Chancellor went through earlier, so I won't go through that, but let me just briefly go through these 3 slides at the end in our appendix. I think they're very illustrative. Page 14 shows the trends in our 3 main funding sources over the last 20 years, state, city, and tuition. And you can see overall we have had steadily increasing numbers for both the state and the city. There's been some years where there have been reductions, and you can see those years clearly. Tuition, you see the phenomenon that the Chancellor was talking about, that there's years where it's steady, and then all of a sudden there's large spikes, and then followed by steady years, and again large spikes. But overall, increases when you compare what we had in 1991 to what we have now. However, you jump to slide 15, and you adjust those numbers for the higher education price index, the actual purchasing power that we have from both state funds and city funds is diminished from fiscal year 91. So over the last 20 years, if you adjust for the HEPI index, we actually have less purchasing power than we had back in 1991. And the last slide, again, just to touch back on our capital needs, you can see from this bar graph here that the overwhelming majority of our facilities at both the senior and community colleges are over 30 years old. Again, illustrating the point that our capital dollars are very crucially needed at all our campuses. So that's the presentation. We'll take any questions now or comments.
Well, we're going to give this presentation to the Council of Presidents. It will be given to the Faculty Senate. We'll have to work that out with you, Sandy. And but we're going to build on this presentation certainly in September at the board meeting, and then when we have to take action in November, you'll all be prepared with the data, and we will have a better sense of where the legislature is and the new governor is at that time.
Professor Martell.
I was wondering if there was a role for faculty representatives on any of these working groups. Once reports tend to be issued, they tend to take on a life of their own, and I'm wondering if during the process of actually developing them, there wouldn't be some opportunity for comment prior to their initially being issued. Certainly whatever is going to be articulated in these groups are going to have an impact on one significant group of stakeholders, and it strikes me as at least the suggestion worth considering.
The answer is yes, Terry. When I created these, I guess about 3 years ago, when we anticipated that we were going to be coming into some challenging times, it was really the opening salvo, but they're not going to be ironclad recommendations. We're going to need much more ubiquitous participation, and the answer is yes.
Thank you.
So there'll be preliminary reports, but it'll be guideposts.
Any further questions? Yes, Chairman.
This is clearly not sustainable. We can't run the university the way we have over the last decade against this kind of fiscal picture. For example, we're trying to increase not only the number of the full-time faculty, but the percentage of courses taught by the full-time faculty. That's already going in the other direction, and it's about to get a lot worse. We have to ask ourselves as a board whether we can manage to serve every student who needs our help. We have to ask questions like, would we rather educate 225,000 students reasonably well in the senior colleges, or educate 300,000 not very well? I think that the likelihood is that look, I don't Mark, you and Matt know far more about Albany than I do, but I think a new governor comes to town. I don't care what his politics are. It's get the bad news fiscally on the table and get it as much into the first year that he's in office as possible. So I think we're going to get slammed in the mid-year for fiscal 2011 and hammered in 2012, much worse than this. So I think we're looking at problems that are hard to manage in the usual, manage through it and do a little less of this and more of that and so on. And I think we're looking at the need for some rather radical restructuring of our educational ambitions, because this is absolutely not sustainable. This is going to be, if we keep adding students and against this kind of a fiscal outlook, I think we're not making the tough choices that we need to make. And so I think we are in a very sort of perilous situation, and as a board, we really have to recognize what I know Matt, you, and Mark, and all your colleagues recognize very well. For us, it's a little more distant, but when you can't look at a presentation like this without saying we've got some really serious problems that managing through in the usual way is not going to successfully achieve, in my opinion. And so I'm just saying that now because I think it's a hard kind of attitude to get our heads around, but I'm afraid that, and I hope I'm wrong, but I'm afraid that I'm not. And the worst thing that can happen in a university is not budget cuts, really. It's the collapse of morale. It's the collapse of hope for the future that makes everybody less effective, less enthusiastic than they otherwise are. And if the price of maintaining our morale, if the price of maintaining the quality of our faculty and their belief in the future is serving fewer students, I realize that is flatly incompatible with our ambitions for our public mission. But if we carry out our public mission in a mediocre to less than mediocre way, then we're accomplishing even less than we would be if we took some subset of the students we ought to be serving and said, all right, we're going to do a good job with these folks, and the way the political process in New York has responded to this compact idea makes me despair for the hope of any kind of rational approach to the governance of public higher education in this state. We have to figure out how to somehow do this ourselves better. I don't know just what that is. What's happened in other states is they're all privatizing like crazy. And by privatizing, I mean behaving as if they were private universities. I don't know whether that's our future. I hope not, but this is not workable.
That's why I think it's so critically important that we get a compact kind of idea institutionalized in the very fabric of how public higher education is thought of and advanced and supported in New York State. We've made some wonderful investment over the past few years, but it's all been bootstrapped.
Right.
We've done it ourselves through the compact, but if it's institutionalized, I think that will help us tremendously. To your point about whether we can educate the numbers of students that want to come into this university is probably the most serious question that we're facing in the university. I've talked with our presidents about this ad nauseum, between the moral imperative about giving students an opportunity to improve their lives by studying here at the university, but at the same time understanding that if we stuff so many students in to a physical edifice that doesn't have the kind of supports that it needs in faculty and academic supports, what are we really doing? Are we giving them a true experience? And I seriously question that, so I agree with that. And those are going to be very hard decisions, and that's going to be a different way of behaving than we've ever behaved at the university, and I hope that we can avoid that. We did that for the first time in the history of CUNY this year. We created waiting lists that were dominated at our community colleges. I didn't want to do that, but we had no choice because we realized that if we admitted all of these students, they would not get an experience that was real. And we made a decision, and we took some hits for it. But I think and I agree, Benno, I think the situation will get worse before it gets better. When you start looking at the projections on deficiencies that exist in the state of New York, they're really frightening.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? We have to go back to the agenda. We'll run fast. Thank you, Chancellor. I think. Okay, we have two items. I'll do them both, and we can vote in unison. Resolution 1A is a resolution authorizing General Counsel to execute a contract on behalf of the Controller to enter into a contract with the vendor who will provide hazardous waste removal services. Such contract shall be awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder after public advertisement and sealed bidding pursuant to law and university regulations. Such purchase shall not exceed an estimated cost of $300,000, chargeable to each college in accordance with its usage for the applicable fiscal years. The contract term shall be 5 years with the option for the university to terminate on each anniversary date of the contract. The contract shall be subject to the approval as to form by the University General Counsel. Action item 1C is a resolution authorizing the General Counsel to execute a contract on behalf of the University Controller to enter into a contract with the vendor who will provide student loan billing services. The contract shall be awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder after public advertisement and sealed bidding pursuant to law and university regulations. Such purchase shall not exceed an estimated cost of $300,000 during the applicable fiscal year. The contract term shall be 5 years with an option for the university to terminate on each anniversary date of the contract. The contract will be subject to the approval as to form by the University General Counsel. Do I have a motion for these?
So move.
Seconded? Second. Okay. Any questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We now have a report on our investments, and we have a friend here from Cambridge Associates, Mark
Fowler, yes.
Mark. Remember Mark, the first name. I can't read it. I'm sorry.
It's all right. Well, I do have a little bit of good news to share. I think we all need it after hearing some of those reports.
Thank you.
We do have July numbers updated in the materials that have been provided to you. I'm going to talk from Janet's memo, and on the second page of the memo, you'll see a snapshot of the portfolio at the end of July. So the good news is July, the markets had a nice bounce back. They were up about 7% on the back of some positive earnings surprises. That was a welcome relief after the results that we saw at the end of June. And year to date, your portfolio is up about 1% all in. By comparison, global equity markets are down about 2.5%. And relative to a custom benchmark, you've essentially matched a custom benchmark, which is also up 1%. Generally speaking, your managers have performed pretty well on a relative basis. There are a couple areas where you're underperforming. One is in the real assets category. The other is in the fixed income category. On the fixed income side, you trailed a little bit year to date, but you recall that we moved to an index approach there. So going forward, you will match the index. On the real assets, your manager there was positioned for a cyclical recovery in that space. That obviously was not the way to be positioned. Their bets were at the margins, but that's caused a little bit of underperformance year to date. On the hedge fund side, your hedge funds are down about 2.1% since you added them to the portfolio. By comparison, the markets are down about 5.5%. The hedge fund managers have been moving to a more conservative positioning given everything we've been reading about, hearing about concerns in Europe. And I think July is kind of a good indication of what you might expect during these sharp rallies. They were up just over 1% in July, about 1.5% in July, while the markets were up 7%. So I think what you should expect, what we hope for, is slow and steady, and to kind of chop off some of the extremes, both at the high end and particularly on the low end of things. Generally speaking, I think we've been telling clients to expect volatility. Markets don't like uncertainty, and there sure is plenty of that right now. To the extent that we do have a little bit more clarification on where the economy is headed, and the market's trying to figure out whether we're going to be into some sort of sustained, albeit maybe a little bit less robust recovery, or whether we head into some double dip. The market's priced in a lot of that. It's one of the reasons the market rallied when the GDP numbers were revised. They actually came in better than expected. I think July is also a good indication of that. So earnings were better than expected. The market rebounded strongly. So it's a difficult, certainly there are some headwinds with the economic picture, but on balance, earnings look reasonable. They're not significantly overvalued. They're kind of an average, and companies do have a lot of cash on their balance sheets. One area that could be positive, and this is something the hedge fund managers have been expecting, is with all this cash on their balance sheets, near record earnings, you might see a bit of an increase in merger and acquisition activity. Seeing a little bit of that on the hedge fund side, and you do have managers that can take advantage of that. But that could also be potentially good for some of the stocks that your equity managers are owning. So, we would continue to expect some volatility going forward. We think you're well diversified, certainly much better diversified now than if we looked in the rearview mirror year and a half ago. But we don't see any robust growth going forward. And unfortunately, things that we've always thought of safe, municipal bonds, treasury bills, even cash, and cash isn't safe in an environment where you're spending 5%, and some of these stimulus measures could potentially trigger inflation down the road. So we think you need to be well diversified and have good managers in place, and we think you're positioned for that. So no recommendations at this time. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into private equity in the fall, and that deeper dive will kind of really evaluate whether it makes sense for CUNY to move forward with an investment and how you might implement that. So it'll be a robust discussion, and we look forward to having it with you in October. Any questions?
Do you know as yet what the sort of top 30 university endowments, how they performed for the fiscal year that ended June 30?
The top quartile, I'm less sure of. I could.
I'm in top quartile in size. I didn't mean in performance.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The larger universities who have the significant allocations of private equity and public equity, larger allocations to private equity, which really hasn't rebounded much like the marketable space. They've actually been underperforming some of the clients that have less exposure there. So your numbers are going to look good compared to some of those others.
Yes.
Is it your intention to have an investment committee meeting this fall
Yes.
to discuss these things?
There will be an investment committee meeting this fall. Yeah. If there are no other comments, I would like to go back to the opening discussion, and I won't take a whole lot of time, but I just wanted to take some time to give some thought to this and our role and our responsibility as trustees. Kay, you and I and Valerie, we've been on this board now for quite some time, and we've actually lived through a period of great growth and stability. And I've often wondered when I've come to these meetings, boy, these fiscal affair meetings have been easy, and it wasn't always that way. I can remember when times were tough. Well, they're back again, and I do believe it's our responsibility as trustees, as fiduciaries, to engage in this battle in a way in which we can help the Chancellery. And I've sat next to Mark in the past, and there's no better wartime consigliere when it comes to budget problems than someone like Mark, and I think Matt is it's in good shape to have Mark there, but I think we're going to have to call upon us to go through those battle cries of never give in, never give in, and we will need to do that. And Matt, you will have my support, and I will do everything I can to have the trustees do whatever they can to help you in Albany and anywhere. To make sure that all of the advancements that have been made at this university over the last decade continue, because we cannot let it roll back in any way, shape, or form. Too much has been done, too far has gone, too much has gone forward.
Great.
So, you know, I was rear my head up as the contrarian. So, you have my full support, whatever it takes. You want me to go to Albany, I'll go to Albany. I've done it before.
This board has been great. None of you ever said no to me on anything I've asked, and I know that I can count on you as we move forward, so I appreciate that.
I can just make one comment. You know, dollars and people who appropriate dollars often forget this, but dollars have consequences. And I think Chairman Schmidt's statement about lack of dollars causes boards to make choices that are often unpopular but necessary. I want to commend on his comments, because the truth of the matter is it's those types of choices that we're going to be looking at. And I think just because people who may appropriate dollars or deal with the appropriation process may not articulate what those choices mean, I think part of our role is to articulate what those choices mean. I want to identify myself with your remarks, Madeline. I think they're very well timed.
Any other comments, questions? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Thank you.
You get it over? Absolutely.